Hello, I'm Pauline Davies at the Quantum Biology School of Pioneer Science in Parati, Brazil, and talking to two distinguished scientists who both use magnetic sensing in their work, but in different ways. Fabrisia Ambrosio, you're from Brazil, and you started out as a rehabilitation and biomechanics expert, helping people recover from or live from conditions like multiple sclerosis and strokes. And then your interests branched out, and now you've got lots of titles and roles, including being a professor in the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation at Harvard Medical School, and the director of the Discovery Center for Musculoskeletal Recovery at the Sean Adams Research Institute in Massachusetts. And beside you is Peter Hore. Peter, you're a professor of chemistry at the University of Oxford and an expert on nuclear magnetic resonance and spin chemistry, and you're working on a really interesting project to understand how birds use navigation as they fly around the globe. Peter, can you explain what you're doing?
Yes, so I'm interested in how birds detect the direction of the Earth's magnetic field. So it's quite clear that small songbirds do have a magnetic compass. And that's been known for sure since the 1960s, and we still don't really know how that works. And I'd like to find out.
So it's a pretty tricky task you're doing, yes?
It's a challenge, indeed, but an enjoyable one.
And Fabrisia, how about you? What are you working on?
So our work has largely been inspired by Peter's work in birds, and we started to ask the question whether there may be similar mechanisms, quantum mechanisms at play within our bodies. For example, our cells and different vesicles within our bodies using quantum principles for migration within our system.
So can you explain more? You're talking about wounds in some way and presumably trying to promote healing. Is that right?
That's exactly right. With our interest in regenerative medicine and stem cell biology, we've had a long-standing interest in understanding factors that dictate stem cell behavior. And we know with an acute tissue injury, there is an electromagnetic field that is generated. So we want to know whether that electromagnetic field may be influencing the stem cells at that site of injury.
How would that involve magnetism? Because I mentioned magnetism in the introduction.
So with the electromagnetic fields, it may be that stem cells are capable of being sensitized to those magnetic fields, such that the stem cells then may follow those magnetic fields to be able to migrate to the area where they can promote regeneration. Not so dissimilar from the mechanism that is hypothesized to be at play in the birds.
Right. And so, Peter, I know that sometimes what you're studying is what's called the avian compass, isn't it? How do you know that birds are actually using an avian compass, using magnetism? How can you prove that?
Okay, so you need to test the birds in the laboratory under conditions where the only information they have that would give them a sense of direction is the magnetic field that you subject them to. And if you test the birds during the migratory season, when they're motivated to fly, then the direction in which they jump inside their cages is the direction in which they would fly if they were released. So all you have to do to show that they have a magnetic compass and that they're using it is to rotate that magnetic field and see if they jump in a different direction. And then you know that they're using their compass.
So you're surrounding the cage by some sort of screening device that screens out the magnetic field of the Earth. Is that right?
No, you have to let the Earth's magnetic field in. So screening is important indeed to keep out time-dependent magnetic fields, which might interfere with a bird's perception of the Earth's magnetic field. And then you surround the cages with magnetic field coils. And then by varying the currents through those coils, you can alter the field experienced by the animals in the middle.
Does this upset the birds at all?
It doesn't seem to, no. They're perfectly happy to be tested in this way, and of course very carefully looked after in aviaries.
And do you have the similar sort of problem with your cells, Fabrisia?
We have, I would say, similar questions that we
Similar
are starting
questions.
to ask, though we are, we don't have the extensive history of research in this area. It's a relatively new area of direction for us, but the principles are very similar. And so we look at, for example, trying to block the Earth's magnetic field and evaluate how our stem cells migrate. We see that eliminating the Earth's magnetic field does indeed decrease migration of our stem cells. And similarly, we see we can apply magnetic fields in very targeted directions, and that we can kind of orient the stem cells in the direction of the field.
Right. And I know that photons come into this somehow, don't they?
I think that's one of the things that we're particularly excited about is this idea that photons, which we have found to be increased at the site of injury, may be contributing to the sensitivity of our stem cells to the magnetic fields. So I think what's interesting about this direction is that now photons, which we've known to exist in the body for many years now, we're thinking about whether they have a functional role.
So that might come as a surprise to many people. It did to me, because I didn't know that, bodies sort of gave out photons, and particularly in wounds, you get more photons.
That's what we're seeing. So cells, even under conditions of homeostasis, they do emit photons naturally. But what we saw was that when we induce a cellular injury, the extent of those photons, and specifically we find blue photons, increase at that injury site. It's interesting that it's blue photons because those are the same photons that seem to be at play in the bird mechanism.
Right. So, Peter, what about photons in your work? Are you finding that they're important?
Oh, crucial. So the bird's compass is light dependent. So if they're tested in total darkness, then in their cages they jump in random directions. They can't use the compass. And as Fabrisia says, specifically they need light in the blue part of the visual spectrum. So if you test them under green or red light, again they jump in random directions. They require blue light.
And some of these birds that are navigating around the globe, I mean, they're not stopping, they're flying through the night. How are they navigating? They don't get the light from the sun, presumably.
They don't get the light from the sun, but they have starlight.
And that's sufficient?
It seems so, yes. I mean, many of these birds fly only at night.
What happens... I know that the magnetic pole wanders a bit. I mean, does that affect birds? Do they start to get lost?
There's some evidence that, not that they get lost, but that they use the magnetic field. They imprint on the strength, direction of the magnetic field at the point at which they were hatched, and use that as some indication of where to stop on their way back.
So they can figure it out, these clever birds.
They're remarkably clever.
And what about in the occasional times when the pole flips, as it has in history?
Yes, well, the birds have a rather strange sort of compass, so that if that flip of the magnetic field coils happened instantaneously, the birds wouldn't notice. So their compass is not like the magnetized compass needles we used to use before we had GPS and so on.
So they wouldn't notice if it happened?
No, but of course it doesn't happen instantaneously.
No.
It takes several thousand years. And it's not clear what would happen during that period. I mean, it's possible that they can just turn up the sensitivity. So the changes in the magnetic field is quite slow compared to the lifetime of a bird. So there's possibility that they can adapt through the generations. But there's no evidence in the fossil record of mass extinctions at the times when the Earth's field was changing.
So they just somehow
So they seem to
managed.
survive. Maybe they just use other directional cues during those periods.
Okay, and I want to know about these blue photons a little bit more. Why are blue photons so special in all of this?
Well, we think that the mechanism involves a protein called cryptochrome, which absorbs blue light, and in that way forms a state of the protein molecule that is sensitive to magnetic fields.
So if you've got blue light, which is so important in birds, and Fabrisia, you're finding blue light is very important in wound healing, do you think the blue photons could have other significant properties in our lives, bodies, or whatever?
Well, we're currently asking the question as to whether blue photons in an injury site, at a site of injury, as we're seeing specifically looking at skeletal muscle, may also be important in other tissues. So, for example, blue light in other regenerating organs, do those photons actually play a role in regeneration? We haven't tested that yet, but it's something we would like to evaluate. I think there are also the importance of other photons within our body under different conditions. So, for example, there's some hypotheses that red photons may be important for mitochondrial function. And so those are also some interesting questions that we're hoping to pursue.
What sort of breakthrough in science would enable you to actually make a huge leap forward in your work? I'll ask you first and then Peter.
Well, I am particularly excited about understanding these quantum mechanisms for two reasons, I would say. On one hand, I'm very interested if we can understand some fundamental mechanisms that guide tissue healing, just endogenous tissue healing. Skeletal muscle is a great model because it heals so well if the injury is not too extensive. So if we can understand some of these mechanisms, our goal is to develop therapeutics that kind of leverage these quantum principles and promote healing cascades, even under conditions of more severe injuries, or maybe even in the context of diseases.
That would be amazing.
That would be exciting if it were to happen. I think the other thing that excites me a lot is if we can understand how some of these quantum principles exist in biological systems, then I think that would be a huge advantage for also quantum mechanics, because the fact that some of these quantum mechanisms may be existing in the warm and messy biological environment would teach us a lot about just fundamental principles.
Absolutely, and that's one thing I didn't mention to Peter. I mean, I know I'm going to ask you about the breakthrough that you need in your work, but I've heard a lot about decoherence and that messing up quantum processes. Now, in the brain, when it's warm and wet, how do you stop that happening? How do you stop it happening long enough for sensible processes to happen in the birds' brains?
Yes, it's a good question. I wish I really knew the answer in detail, but one of the things about the mechanism that we think is at the heart of the bird's magnetic compass involves forms of molecules called radicals, which contain electrons. And magnetically, the electrons interact very weakly with their surroundings. And that's why the coherence can last perhaps as long as a microsecond, a millionth of a second. And that's much, much longer than most sorts of coherence, which would disappear a million times even faster than that.
So was that a surprise when you or whoever discovered that?
No, because one can study the same sort of molecules in the laboratory under very carefully controlled conditions. And so the mechanisms of decoherence, we think, are quite well understood. So we can calculate and measure these things in the lab. I think what's behind your question is that maybe things are much slower in biology if they are important for things like Fabrisia's work or for the bird's compass. And so that's something we don't really understand.
So what sort of new breakthrough do you need in your work to make huge progress?
I think the major breakthrough we need is more or less conceptual. So the theory of this mechanism is quite well developed, so we can calculate with reasonable certainty how big the magnetic field effects would be to allow, for example, a bird to detect the direction of the Earth's magnetic field. And the conclusion you reach when you do those calculations is that this mechanism is never going to work. It's not going to be sensitive enough. So if it is really the right mechanism, there must be some form of amplification that nature has devised to allow these very weak effects to have some significance in biology. And I would really like to understand that mechanism of amplification. I think that would be the breakthrough, not just for the navigation, but in all sorts of areas of biology.
Because this navigation ability in the birds that fly around the globe is so useful, do you think it's found in most species of birds?
It seems so. I mean, it's difficult to be sure. Some people think that even domestic chicken have a magnetic sense, even though they don't travel huge distances. Others don't believe that. They're difficult experiments to do. But it seems likely that many birds have the same proteins and possibly have the same ability, even though they don't fly thousands of kilometers.
And what about other animals, maybe ourselves? I mean, Fabrisia, have you got any idea? You study the human body.
So we've mostly started asking questions down to the cellular level, and we are also very interested in understanding what are, for example, the photosensitive proteins.
I want to know whether my navigation sense can improve.
There you go. I have terrible orientation, so understanding how that works would be very helpful for me personally even. But I think, better understanding the mechanisms has just a number of different possibilities.
How about you, Peter? What do you think?
There's not much evidence that we have a magnetic sense.
Though I have heard that some people are very sensitive to the magnetic field. They claim that they've got good navigational ability. Mm-hmm. So have you heard that?
I have heard that. I don't know of any experiments that really back that up.
Fabrisia?
I mean, I think it's an intriguing question, one that needs a lot more rigorous studies to really be able to say so one way or another.
Peter, how did you get into the field of quantum biology? I think you've been in it for about 20 years, but you didn't start off, of course, just in quantum biology, did you?
No, I'm a chemist. I started off studying chemical reactions in the lab that are sensitive to magnetic fields. So the same sort of mechanism that we now think might be happening in the bird's eyes. And so in 2000, when cryptochrome was suggested as the protein in which all this magnetically sensitive chemistry might take place, it was a fairly natural, even irresistible thing to get interested in. So, yeah, we got started about 20 years ago, as you say.
And has it been fun ever since?
It's been enormous fun, yes. It's great. I get to work with quantum physicists and zoologists and everyone in between.
It sounds great. How about you, Fabrisia? How did you get started in quantum biology?
So I've long been interested in factors that affect stem cell function ever since starting my faculty position. And so we've looked at different extrinsic factors, mechanical forces, growth factors, and I became interested in potentially quantum mechanisms, actually first after reading a magazine article in The Scientist on the topic of quantum biology. And then I read a book, Life on the Edge, by Jim Al-Khalili, that also kind of talked about this field and some of the advances, and it piqued my interest, and I've been hooked ever since.
Wow, that just shows the power of popularization of science, doesn't it?
Exactly. It was not something that I had been reading about with the intention to bring it into my own work. It was just for my own general interest. But then it started generating some ideas in my mind, and we had the opportunity to start testing them.
And finally, what do you expect to gain from being here with all these quantum biologists here in Perici?
Well, being from Brazil myself, I'm just thrilled to have this opportunity and to spend the week here with the students and the faculty. I'm really excited about the quantum biology program that they have going on that I think in many ways is leading the field and really supportive of the work and the science. Looking forward to these next several days.
And Peter?
Well, much the same, really. I'm looking forward to interacting with the students. I mean, they are the future of this field, and I hope that in some small way we can inspire them a bit.
Thank you both very much, Fabrisia Ambrosio and Peter Hore.
Thank you, Pauline.